as members are allowed to make substantive contributions. So welcome to the interim meeting of the W3C WebRTC Working Group. During this meeting, we're going to talk about the Working Group Charter and hoping to make progress on some open issues in WebRTC PC and actually mostly screen sharing. And as usual, we will continue to edit the draft, and updates will follow the meeting according to what the working group decides. So, Stefan, do you want to talk about the meetings, upcoming meetings?
Yeah, as I hope everyone have seen, we have a doodle poll out for a face-to-face meeting in Stockholm, Sweden. And based on current input, we propose that we go with June 19 and 20.
Hey, Stefan, it's Colin here. I have a comment. I ran our algorithm from long ago, and it predicted that the meeting should be in North America, not Europe. But I don't care deeply about that, but I think it would be reasonable to ask the question as part of the most poll of where we should have the meeting, because several people I talked to said they would not go if it was in Europe, which includes myself, but said they would. And that's why I didn't figure out the poll. I just figured, like, hey, I shouldn't vote on this if I'm not going to go. I mean, would it be reasonable to ask people about, you know, where we should have the meeting? Or at least I think you should address the issue of, we had an agreed algorithm for deciding on location before, and this is not consistent with that, which I'm not complaining about, but is.
I think we all forgot about the algorithm.
What was the algorithm?
So Ecker had this formula that took into account where all our previous meetings had been and where all our members were based, and calculated what would be the next meeting that evened out the pain of traveling.
Okay.
Do not think it will help everyone anyway.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we are approaching June, and there is some kind of W3C rule on 8 weeks advance notice.
Yeah, and any more time and we're into ITF week. So you might as well go to Montreal.
Yeah.
So I think the reason why we came up with Stockholm was that well, we haven't been here for a while, and the next meeting is in North America. The next ITF meeting is North America.
The next meeting of this working group is in France, as this slide points out, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Actually, that's the next meeting we care about.
Well, I mean, I will note that most of the people that are starting to show up for these meetings are not showing up for ITF meetings and vice versa. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but anyway, I will note. I think, you know, we can carry on however we want. I'd forgotten about. I thought the deadline. I thought it was a shorter proposal for W3C. Of announcing when the meetings are, not 8 weeks. So I hadn't quite realized that issue, but I think the location is the important thing, not the dates.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
so I'll show up on either continent. So.
Yeah. Are there people who can't make it to Stockholm who would? Well, just a couple of questions, I guess. One question would be, we had some objections to the ITF. Are there people who could make it in Stockholm who couldn't make it to the ITF?
So the objections to ITF were mostly that people didn't want to make a long meeting longer. Someone's making noise.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute myself. It won't let me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Salt.
So Harald, you were saying something.
No, I was saying that the main objection to ITF was people who didn't want to make a long meeting longer.
Well, and there were some objections to running over Sunday as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my major concern here is if we have people who wouldn't be able to come, who still would want to be active or might even present, then we'll need to do remote participation. And once we do that, you know, how many of the people who would actually travel to Stockholm will actually do remote instead? So what's the next step, Stefan? Do we bring this to the list, or what do we do here?
Yeah, I guess we need to do that. Cullen, I didn't quite catch. Would you be able to come to Stockholm or not?
No, I will definitely be remote, and I'll host other people remote if we do Stockholm. It's the issue is not the exact dates. The issue, and look, I understand this is an issue going the other direction if we put North America for everyone as well, right? But it's the basically taking a week of time for the travel and the just sheer number of trips I've had to do this year that are international trips, or just budget-wise an issue as well. So I won't come, but I understand that there's probably somebody who can't come the other direction too. So I'm understanding of that. I just think that that location is actually really important when we're talking about these things, and we need to figure out some way of making sure we do the right thing on that.
Would it be an option to run this completely remotely? I mean, like a virtual meeting, but a bit longer.
Well, the question would be the amount of time. You know, I've rarely seen remote meetings go for like a full 2 days.
No.
We could do something shorter, of course. You know, even 2 like hour-and-a-half meetings remotely. That could be done. I don't know if it would be a substitute, but
look, I'm not asking the meeting be changed for me. I want to be clear on that, or whatever.
Well, but I mean, if people are going to be remote, a lot of people are going to be remote anyway. It's worth talking about. Let me ask this question, Cullen. Do the days actually work?
That's a good question. Let me just check that quickly here.
Because yes, Stefan, we could do like could even do a 3-hour meeting, I guess, with a little break or something.
Yeah, and we could do it 2 days in a row, I guess.
Yeah, that stretches the limits of what I've seen be successful in a remote meeting, but sure, what the hey.
The days do work for me. I have certainly been at well, I mean, you guys know, we've been at meetings where we've all been at meetings where we've attended the whole thing remote, and they've been full day long meetings. But I mean, you're right. If it's totally remote, like 4 or 5 hours seems to work better than 9.
Yeah.
I guess we can't decide anything more than a bit more and take it to the list.
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah. So the 2 questions that have been raised are can we make it totally virtual, and can we move it to North America? And we require yes or no answers on those pretty soon.
Pretty soon, yeah.
Yep.
As next week is the latest we can make it.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And I guess the North American one, I'm just sort of saying, would it be better to move it to North America? You know, like have some way of answering that question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have anyone? I guess we would have a host in North America. That shouldn't be a problem, right?
That should not be a problem.
Would not be a problem, right? But we gotta make a decision soon. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And then for TPAC Lyon, I mean, Harald already put on the list that we meet on Monday and Tuesday. And there were no comments, so it's more, well, This is what we will go with.
So there being no comments, we'll take that as nobody cares strongly enough in the other direction, so we'll just go with that.
Yep.
Yep.
So I will point out that puts it over Halloween, which is exactly the thing that everyone has always objected to about the. Or is that? Or do I have that wrong?
It's Halloween on Monday?
No, that does. I don't know.
That's
I
the
just
next Monday. Halloween's the next Monday, right? Usually. Anyway.
Yeah. I got the week wrong, so that's perfect. I'm glad to keep it.
Good.
Yep.
Something finally works.
Right. Okay.
I remember doing Halloween in Japan for ITF.
Was that good or bad?
That was great. Ask Alan.
Okay.
Did you buy the drinks?
Okay. Just a little bit about this virtual meeting. If you're here, you probably have basic info on it. We have a link to the slides up on the wiki. We do need a scribe, though. Do we have a volunteer to scribe?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay. Thank you. And the meeting, we say the meeting's being recorded. Have we turned on recording?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So for discussion today, we're going to have a short discussion on the charter, then do some WebRTC PC issues, and then some media capture screen share stuff. Okay. So about the charter, as many of you know, the charter's been extended until May 2018. I guess we're in the AC review phase, and hopefully we'll get something to the AC for a formal vote pretty soon. The draft charter itself extends the charter to March 31st, 2020. So some changes, summary of the changes from the feedback from the last virtual interim. So in terms of liaisons, we added the ICE working group. We added data transfer to the success criteria. For some reason that hadn't been in there before. We clarified the feature removal policy, which is that if you don't have features that aren't implemented by at least two browsers, they can be separated out into an extension document or dropped. And then we clarified the timeline for both WebRTC.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That wasn't my recollection. I thought it was mandatory features not implemented, optional features that were implemented by at least one stayed in. Is that incorrect, my memory of that?
That's incorrect. The thing that plagues this one is the same as ITF, and that unless we have two implementations, we have no idea whether it's specified or not.
Does that include things like stats, Harold, the optional stats?
I'm not sure where I think it should, but I would mumble on that. So I think we never had the language saying optional features can have only one implementation and remain in the spec.
Well, given you've always been on one strong end of this argument, Harold, I think we should take this one to the list of formal vote.
Well, you could certainly. How about if we discuss it on the list first?
Okay, but let's track down some people and figure this one out, because I don't like this one. Just every single time we discuss it, we seem to come to one thing and then later characterize somewhat differently. So
yeah, so I'd like you to check to see if I'd like you to find a quote that says we can go with only one in our previous minutes, because I think that's not what I think we come up with.
All of our previous minutes are inadequate multiple times, so I'm not looking for anything in the previous minutes.
Inadequate minutes can be used as an argument for whatever.
So we have two open issues, which one of them relates to use cases. And I think we say in the charter already that we can do use cases, and I think the question is, will we do them for 2.0? And I think there's at least some people who want to do them. And the other is when we start the WebRTC 2.0 work, because there are some open issues relating to the object model, some of which we'll talk about today. So the question is, how do you start on a new object model when we still have some questions about the existing one? Anyway, I think we'll probably need to bring some of those to the list as well. But we need to converge pretty quickly. Okay, so for discussion today, here are the WebRTC PC issues. And I'll start with two of them, and I think then we have Jan Ivar and Harold. Okay. So issue 1813, I think, was raised initially by Jan Ivar. And we've had a little bit of discussion on the list, and it's whether simulcast makes sense for audio or not. Because currently no browser supports simulcast audio. And so question number one is, do we require support for simulcast audio today? And I think the answer is we do, because there's no distinction made between audio and video. Question two is, how should ad transceiver behave when asked to support too many simulcast encodings? In general, what's the error strategy for it? So on question one, this is just my personal opinion here, which is that redundant audio coding is actually superior to simulcast for audio in a number of ways. One is that you can have, and it is done for red, you can have multiple encodings. Like an example is Opus at multiple bit rates. And when you do that, you have less overhead than you would with simulcast, and the SFU can still dig into the packet and selectively forward if it wants to do that. But the other thing you get, which is actually pretty valuable, is you can protect against burst loss. And at least we've seen in our own experiments, this works a lot better than Opus. Well, Opus FTC doesn't support burst loss protection. So you can get that, and that's actually a pretty big improvement in audio quality. So that's kind of an argument against requiring simulcast audio. And I guess so. Opinions on the first point.
Cullen here again. I don't see a cue, so ask this. I'm not sure this was the question. Let me ask a question about simulcast video. Is it required? I thought it was optional. The question that I remember this being about is forbidding optional implementation of simulcast audio, not requiring implementation of simulcast audio. The thing that people wanted to do was remove the possibility of a browser implementing simulcast audio.
Any browser? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't make sense to me.
That didn't make sense to me either. But
it's Jan Ivar here. I don't think I don't have a bone in this. I was just merely looking at the API, and the API seemed to suggest that browsers must handle simulcast for audio, yet no browsers implement it. So just it sounded like in the charter we were just talking about needing two implementations, and we don't have that. I don't care that we need to forbid, but the API, I don't think it's okay to leave ambiguity in the API we shouldn't have to do that in order to allow future implementations. We need to specify what it takes to be compliant today. And I'm happy to have language that says, we need at least some language that for any optional features, we need to describe, browser vendors need to know how to handle not supporting something. Like, should we throw a not supported error? And could we have language that said, if you don't support this, throw an error at this point, something like that.
So my take on this has been more or less that the API has to specify what happens if you ask for more layers than the browser supports, and if the number of layers that the browser supports is 1, that is a perfectly valid implementation. It's just not an implementation of simulcast.
Right. That's question 2.
Yeah. So if we can, if we're okay with specifying the API that can support simulcast and does something reasonable when only one level of simulcast is supported, then I think we're fine.
I
but
agree.
we need to specify how the client can detect that only one layer of simulcast is supported.
Right.
There's some interesting questions here, and I understand what question 1 and 2 are combining now, because it sounds like supporting the API is possible by even without implementing simulcast for just one layer, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And therefore, it becomes important. How do browsers communicate how many layers they support? Is really what the question is about.
Well, we had a discussion way back in the past about like adding a capability for the number of layers. The problem was it gets a little complicated because it could be like you could support different number of layers for audio and for video, maybe potentially even a different number of layers depending on the codec. So we couldn't really come up with a very clean way of getting capabilities. It's a little bit easier to just throw an error, like you proposed, Jan Ivar.
Right. And now an error isn't great either, because I could see people programming toward one browser, and then all the other vendors, would throw an error on other vendors, and then it becomes who can support the most layers. I don't know. I mean, the other approach would be best effort and some way of advertising what that is, I guess. Failing an error, it relies on web developers to coding for those error cases. And if they fail to do that, it just stops working on as many browsers as it could have.
So if it fails in the way that all the layers that are asked for that can be sent are sent, and it's possible to discover how many layers are sent, then
I think that would get us to interop better.
Yep.
Yeah. The question is how do you discover what gets sent? Because remember, I mean, as an example, you call a transceiver and ask for 5 or whatever. You can only do 3. What happens? I don't think we've even defined all that well what get parameters returns.
Right.
If get parameters returns 3, then you have a means of detecting it.
Right. I don't think we've made it entirely clear whether that's true.
Oh, but we should.
Yeah.
We should make it clear no matter what.
But Bernard, as you said, it can depend on the codec, and that depends on what the answerer supports.
Right.
So it's a bit
so it could actually be a bit tricky. Yeah.
Well, the good news is that we have an information API that we could use for this.
And I think most of these things we're discussing the same. I mean, I agree with everything that's being said about having to be clear and all those things. It applies to video just as much as audio on most of the things.
Certainly, absolutely, absolutely.
Yep. Audio is just the case where one is going to be the common answer.
Yeah.
I would actually argue that one is also not a great use case, because if you really do like simulcast for one layer, then we basically need to signal an RID and add the RTP header extensions for what purpose then?
Right, exactly. That's kind
of... Well, simulcast for one layer is monocast.
Right, but like, I mean, like, it's like...
Yeah, it's not the same, really, right, because it turns on the RID. That's the problem.
Exactly, it turns on the RID, and then you have like extra overhead in the RTP packets and so on, so I would actually argue if I don't support it, I would basically say 0.
What do you mean? Well, so let me ask one question. Do we agree with Jan Ivar's suggestion to throw a type error if encodings.length is greater than what you support? Is there agreement or disagreement on that point?
I don't know if I agree with that.
You suggested it. Okay. Well, since you disagree with yourself, Jan Ivar, do you have an alternative suggestion to debate yourself?
I like the idea that if people can use get parameters to figure out, they can use set parameters to say, here's what I would like to have happen, and then they can later at some point, and that's unclear when they can actually get that, they can get back, here's what actually happened. I think that's reasonable.
Better than the error.
It's better than the error because at least something happened. And it sounds like people who really are not okay with that happening could then figure out that it didn't happen.
Okay. Well, so how about an alternative proposal, which is you do the best you can, and you then need get parameters will then return the number of encodings the maximum number of codings that were actually acceptable. Let's put it this way. It's not a real-time thing where it tells you exactly what's being sent at this instant.
Right.
But it's just a maximum encodings that the browser can.
Now,
Does that seem? Do people seem to want to go in that direction?
right, superficially, that looks okay. The problem is that today, get parameters, I believe, is spec to only return what got set.
Exactly.
So,
Well, what got right? That's exactly what it says. It's only what got set.
so there might be dragons there.
That's what I'm afraid of.
So let the dragons out. The dragon liberation movement strikes again.
Well, part of the reason for that, Janiver, was just so people wouldn't pull it. Like it's not what you're doing at this instant. You know, you set a maximum of 5, you could only send 3 because of bandwidth, right? So It's not quite that bad.
But at the same time, it seems odd to return just what got set, so people can keep modifying it with potentially modifying things that won't have any effect. So, but at what point would the implementation, and I apologize, I don't know this, be able to return that information correctly? Is that only after negotiation?
For simulcast, yes. Only after offer answer is concluded, when you're like in the stable signaling state, basically.
So people would have to repoll get parameters after negotiation and then at this point we would
for simulcast, yes.
So before negotiation, they might see the 5 layers they set, and after negotiation,
the problem is the whole point of this, right, was that these encoding parameters were supposed to not be dependent on negotiation. So that gets a little weird when you're using get parameters to figure out the outcome of a negotiation.
What does get parameters return before negotiation? Is it the same as after now?
Well, now I'm assuming that, like you said, it returns what was last set. So, you know, I think the model, and this is a little bit speculative, is, you know, if you couldn't have done this, what you would ask for in an answer receiver, you get an error, and then if you don't get an error, then it actually is considered set. And then, or if you do a set parameters, that also sets it, and then get parameters returns that thing.
But wait a minute, aren't we talking about limitation in the client? So couldn't it know right away that, you know, couldn't Firefox say, like, we only support 3 layers? Couldn't we always chop off and reduce any higher numbers to 3? Why does it depend on negotiation in the other end?
Well, the question is, what if the other thing can't support simulcast at all, right? Then the question is, what exactly is it returning? Is it returning the maximum you could do, or is it returning what you're actually going to do?
I think it's basically 2 things, right? It's like basically the JavaScript could be asked to do, for example, 5 layers, right? And the local browser could say like, hey, I can only do 3, and then puts like 3 in its offer, and then it gets the answer back and learns that the other side is willing to do 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way it is today, we thought set parameters is just, it never reflects negotiations, get parameters, right? It never reflects that. It's just what you locally, the maximum you could do.
Okay, so in using Nils's example then, today get parameters would return 5. And it sounds like an improvement.
Only if you could do 5, but yes.
No, but today, the way the spec is written,
right?
If you set 5, you would get back 5.
No. If you can do 5, you would get back 5. If you could only do 3, you would get an error and it wouldn't get set.
Oh, there's an error?
Well, it's badly defined, but yes.
So I'd like to think about ending this part of the conversation, but because we got more things to do. I'd suggest that we have most sympathy for the case where you don't get the error, you get well, if I try this is what will happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I suggest that Janiva draw up a proposal for that, or a pull request for that, and let's see if you like it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm leaning toward returning 3, which was what could be answered right away by limitations of the local browser.
Okay.
That seems incrementally better than today.
Yeah.
All right. 1174, I have reopened this. And the reason I reopened it is we're hearing from some SFU vendors that there is an issue with WebRTC 1.0 CR. Currently, a lot of the conferencing apps support Plan B, and they do it by signaling SSRCs. Current SFUs typically would ignore the RID header extensions. And if they're going to transition to Edge Receiver Unified Plan, they need some way to obtain those SSRCs. And the problem we have is currently we, in PR 1531, we removed the SSRC support from RTC, RTP encoding parameters. So what that means is that, well, I forget what it was. It used to be read-only. So it was something you would get from the browser. You wouldn't be able to choose the SSRCs. But we took it out. And the question is, how then would you have that SSRC information? The people I've talked to don't seem to care whether it comes from the object model or the STP or whatever. They just need to somehow know what SSRCs they're sending so they can signal this to the SFU. And without it, they're going to have problems transitioning to Edge Receiver /Unified Plan. So before going and putting all this stuff back, just wanted to get a sense of the working group about the necessity to know what the SSRCs are. Let me put it this way. Is Taylor here?
Yeah.
Do you understand what the argument is here?
I think so, though.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it needs to go in RTP encoding parameters when it could just go in SDP until.
Yeah, actually, the people I talked to would be okay with the SDP. They just need some way of getting this. So it doesn't have. They just need some way of making sure the information is there.
The third way of doing it is in stats, of course. But the thing with SSRCs is that makes it uncomfortable to have in SDP only is that in theory SSRCs can change, or SSRCs can pop up that didn't occur in the SDP. And reporting on what they are and the place where the reporting on what the SSRC is being received in the object that corresponds to the actual incoming SSRC stream seems more logical to me.
Yeah, this was mostly about signaling what's going out, what SSRC is being sent.
It's reporting what the browser has decided to send to use in the SSRC field.
But then we would need an event. I mean, if you change the SSRC or add one, we would need an event or something. Or
that would be that's actually been implemented. It's an SSRC conflict event. It happens. The problem is it happens fairly rarely. So I know of one implementation of that only, and other people just ignore it. And
so you're saying we could assume it being stable.
I'm saying people. I'm not saying you can assume it, but I'm saying people have been implementing it, assuming that.
Yeah.
I'm actually aware of implementations which actually use this feature as like not a collision thing, but like basically by switching the stream on purpose. Like let's say like switch out the video, right, for like another video source, and they just do it by switching the SSRC without signaling it. Now you would like need to throw an conflict. I mean, it's not like a conflict. It's
no,
just
it wouldn't be a conflict actually.
Yeah, but like still in that case, you still would need to signal somehow to the JavaScript, like, hey, by the way, that what you saw in the SDP is no longer valid.
Right.
That's why it shouldn't be in the SDP. Or we shouldn't depend on it being in the SDP.
Actually, on the SDP, actually, another question: are you talking about that it's only okay to put it in the SDP, which is exchanged over the signaling path, or are we talking about the SDP which you get when you call get current local or remote description, because these are two different things for me.
Yeah, I think Harold's point is it may not make sense to require this in the SDP, and it may not even satisfy the need.
We have had cases of where we interwork with something, and something does not put the SSRC in the SDP, even in the current status.
Right.
State of things.
So, are you suggesting, Harold, we should explore this in stats?
No, I'm saying that the SSRC is already present in stats, but I think we should expose the same value in in whatever objects make sense.
Yeah.
May I ask like another provocative alternative? Would this be a problem if WebRTC 1.0 gets finalized after everyone has switched to Unified Plan?
It's actually blocking implementation of Unified Plan. That's the problem. Yeah, basically these conferencing vendors can't move to add transceiver Unified Plan currently. They're stuck on Plan B. So I'm not hearing. I'm hearing perhaps we should try to come up, debate a couple of proposals for doing this, which may not be just encoding parameters.
But I haven't really heard any alternative on this call.
Well,
except from the stats, and Harald said we shouldn't do it.
No, they're already present in the stats. But I don't like if you. I don't like to stick stuff that is needed in operation into stats in that way. So I'd prefer to expose it. I mean, it would have to be consistent with the numbers in stats, but I think it makes sense to expose them separately.
Yeah, we have a way to expose them. I guess the complication brought up here was what happens if they change. Because RTP encoding parameters, there's no event associated with that. What, Jan-Ivar?
I won't pretend to fully understand what the problem is here, but the slide says the SFU supporting signaling of our SSRCs currently ignore RID header extensions.
Yeah.
If that's currently, is that something that will be fixed, and would that solve this?
Well, it might or might not get. Well, currently I don't. Let me put this. I haven't looked at the roadmaps for all these different SFUs, but the apps kind of work with the SSRC stuff, and I don't think they're planning on mandating RIDs. Let me put it this way. So still, even if these things add RID support, many of the apps wouldn't necessarily change right away.
Right. I know at least one server that uses get contributing sources, where they add a contributing source to an SSRC, a single one, the tricks like that. So I don't fully understand the problem, why they can't switch over, I guess, but I don't know.
Could you explain how this is preventing transition to Unified Plan? I would actually like think it'd be the other way around. Once transition Unified Plan is made, you wouldn't need an SRC signaling at all.
Well, eventually, if everyone did RIDs, they wouldn't. I'm just basically what I'm hearing is that people are planning on sticking with the SSRC signaling, at least for a while.
So, I mean, we can continue supporting it for a while.
Well, I mean,
does there necessarily have to be something in the specification for it, though?
Yeah, I mean, potentially beyond any reasonable transition window. So, in other words, if they had the SSRCs, they would be able to transition a lot sooner than if they didn't.
I'm guessing the problem with the RIDs is that there's there's no. I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's no mapping between the RIDs and the SSRCs, right? So even if you have support for RIDs, you don't know which is which.
Well, no, you build that mapping dynamically by looking at the incoming packets. That's right. How it's spec'd.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, but like in this case, it's not, right? Like they want the SSRCs from the signaling, and I'm saying like in the signaling there's no mapping, so you don't know until you look at the incoming packets. Yeah.
Right.
So we've had the requests to expose SSRCs from Hangouts, which doesn't use SDP signaling. It uses its own form of signaling, and that signaling is totally SSRC focused.
Right. Well, a number of the SFUs, it doesn't really matter whether they use SDP or not, but they all what you've just heard from the Hangouts team is exactly the same thing I've just heard from most of the conferencing vendors. And they use different signaling. You know, they're not all SDP based. So yeah, this isn't just a Hangout specific request. So let me put it this way: do we have at least consensus that we should develop some kind of proposal to address this? Okay. So I'll take that.
I think so.
Okay. All right. So we'll probably have to come. The next step would be to come up with something specific and review it and talk about it. Thank you. Okay, Jan-Ivar, roll back.
Yes. So the issue here is that we have this rollback mechanism, which briefly explained is we want to set things back to the way they were, or undo the last SDP, if you will, and we haven't really specified what happens. In order to do that well, I mean, if the intent is to have things function normally right after that, after rollback only, then we have to address that a lot of things are in the wrong state now, and because some events fired. So, and to go down the list here, so set remote description with an offer that has a new track in it immediately causes a set remote description causes that receiver track to be added to any streams that it was associated with. And it fires add track event on those streams, and also then fires the track event. So should rollback of that try to undo those events by doing it in the reverse, basically remove the track again, that seems natural, and fire remove track on any of those streams, and then mute, fire mute on that track to put it back. And if we want it to really be an undo, it seems like we should do that. And the other example would be if you have a set remote description where a track is missing, that currently causes that track to be removed from any streams it's associated with, and having a remove track event fired on those streams, and fires also a mute event on the track. So a rollback of that removal should presumably put the track back into the streams it was in before the set remote description were rolling back, and fire add track and even the track event on that. And so it sounds to me like we need to do those things, and that would be the least. So it's trying to come up with the least surprising API behavior for applications who do rollback. The alternative is to not do any of those things and basically say, yep, things are going to be in a messed up state if you ever roll back. Handle it.
So this is Colin here. I mean, Jan-Ivar, I think what you're saying makes sense.
Yes.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, it makes sense.
I think that's the PR that does that.
Okay. All right, Harold, 1775.
So what was the conclusion? Do we fire the events?
I heard support for what Jan-Ivar is proposing. Is there anybody who objects to it?
Yep. Since the alternative is abandon all hope, enter here.
Right. Put in a note.
Yep.
Abandon hope.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, it should.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay, next point. So this is one of those things that is just a little bit painful. I mean, the Chrome team identified a problem that required talking about a peer connection outside of its JavaScript context in a way that precluded the natural idea of having a mapping table in JavaScript that maps the identifier of the peer connection to something else. So we have roughly a dozen ways that this can be done by hiding an identifier in various places that nobody would really notice. But it kind of seems wrong to try to sneak in a functionality that has to work in order to make other things work. So we tried instead to propose to add an ID to address this, so that we would have an ID that was a string that was guaranteed to refer to only one peer connection within a given context. We were suggesting a long random number, but just because that makes life easier. So it solved the problem, and it solved it pretty cleanly, and it might be useful for other things. But it failed to reach consensus on the list because people were saying this is such a specific problem, nobody else is going to have it, or words to that effect. So the question is, what should we do now?
When you say outside of JS context, how would you get these IDs there?
So the thing is that in the particular problem we have is that there are two ways to contact the engine inside Chrome that deals with peer connections. One is through the JavaScript API, and one is through a different API. Could have been signaling, could have been something else. It's actually an RPC interface, but the details don't matter. In both cases, the engine that owns the peer connections can find out any information that's inside the peer connection, but doesn't have access to anything outside of the peer connection object. So if there's an ID inside the peer connection, we can use it. If the ID is outside of the peer connection, we can get at it through one interface, but not the other interface.
And why does it need to be standardized?
We wanted to follow the principle that any function that runs across the JavaScript interface is specified in a standard, with the hope that other browsers would implement it too. We have been strongly warned against trying to sneak functions in where we impose particular behavior patterns on the interface on the JavaScript API of the browser in order to make internal things work. So we're trying to be a good citizen in how we deal with the speaking with my Chrome hat on. We're trying to be good citizens in how we manage the JavaScript API and not do proprietary things on it if we can avoid it. I mean, if we have to, we have to. We know a dozen ways to do it, but we would like not to.
I'm confused in that this is needed for something internal only to Chrome, and I don't see an argument for this as something needed for the web-facing API. So it's confusing why this would be part of the standard without any reason other than an internal implementation detail of Chrome.
We're thinking that it's not unlikely that we will find other use cases. So far, we we have had some people suggesting that it's useful for logs and it's useful for having tokens that are interchanged in as part of the identity protocol. And I mean, if something is there with known properties, and someone is going to make use of it, but the main thing is that we either do this as a private interface or we do this as a public interface. And if it's public interface, we have to make it part of the standard. If it's a private interface, well, nobody else would implement it.
So it sounds like the next step, if we want to standardize this, would be come up with at least a viable use case or two where something outside of Chrome might need this. Am I wrong?
Well, the next step is either we implement our private API and ship that and probably stick with that forever, or we put this in a standard and ship that.
I understand that's what you internally need to do. Yep. You need to do one of those two things.
Yes.
But to justify putting in the standard, we need some sort. I would think we need some sort of justification for its existence outside of Chrome.
It would be very nice to have that, yes. I'm not sure it's not necessarily an absolute requirement.
It doesn't have to be absolutely required, but there has to be a justification, and that people are willing to accept. And internal use for Chrome, I don't see as sufficient justification for being in the standard. So I would suggest the next step on this would be send a message to the list with, here are things for which this would make things easier or better or something for web things outside of Chrome. And if you can't come up with those, I would suggest a private interface.
Any objections to that suggestion? Okay, I think we have a way forward on this one.
We have a very quiet group otherwise.
Okay, 1826, Yanivar. Yanivar? Are you muted? Yanivar. Is Yanivar still with us?
It does show he's speaking.
Oh, maybe.
It has dropped now.
I saw him like muting and unmuting a couple of times.
Yeah, he's not on the list anymore now.
Okay.
I suspect he'll be back in a second.
Okay.
You might want to just skip ahead and come back.
Okay. Well, we can hand things over to Suhas.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi, Yanivar.
Hi, sorry.
You're back.
Yes, audio stopped working. It seems to happen here. Yes. Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I was writing a blog using transceivers and fiddles and trying to use transceivers only to do negotiation on the answering side, and realizing that transceivers only let us answer with streamless tracks, basically. I had one example that used add track. Using add track works. Then you can specify, that's the only way we allow to specify stream associations today. And that works in the simple cases where the transceiver you're dealing with is the first unused transceiver in the get transceivers order, because then add track will implicitly attach your track to that transceiver. But as a general solution, that's really no good, because if you say you have 5 transceivers, there's no way to address the third one in that list with then first mapping stream associations for every transceiver ahead of it in that list. So that seems suboptimal. So, and I think we need a general way to add a track with streams to any given transceiver. So the proposal there is to add, and the example here shows on the slide, the example is answering an incoming SDP message. We set remote description. We address a specific receiver that we want to deal with, and then we set its direction to send receive, because we want to add the track from our side to the answer. We use replace track, which is asynchronous. We get the video track from our stream, and then today we would have to send back a track that had no stream associations, which is limiting. So the addition would be a transceiver sender, basically on the sender a new set streams method that takes an array of streams, similar to what add transceiver does. And that way, when you set the local description with the answer, you have a track that also has stream associations. So that would cover this, and it would be feature parity with what AddTrack does, if you were to use AddTrack for this. And that's it. The other thing was that I think another benefit of this would be that you could use this to add stream associations later, which has been, I think, requested by people in the past as a missing thing that people have wanted. So we could make this work to do that as well. So if you were to call set streams outside of negotiation in stable state, we could, for instance, trigger negotiation needed, because on the remote end, we already need to handle changes to stream associations anyway for other reasons. And there's a link in the issue to more details on that. Does that sound reasonable?
So set streams essentially takes sender.track and puts it into the streams in the list?
It doesn't. It does the same thing that you would do with AddTrack when you specify AddTrack, comma, and then a series of streams.
Okay.
It would add the streams. It would modify the associated media streams internal slot for the sender, so that when you later negotiate, or if you're in negotiation already, when you create set the local description with an answer, the returning track would have stream associations. So unlike replace track, it doesn't really affect the track so much, because replace track is instant, but it affects the sender that gets added to the SDP, and how it would have MS IDs for the track.
So to me, this seems like a simple solution to the problem. I couldn't think of a simpler one, to put it that way.
My only little comment would be that does it make sense to call this set streams? It suggests that that's like multiple streams, but like a single transceiver, I would assume, is only a single stream?
No, a single transceiver can have multiple streams.
Yeah, it's a single track, but that track can be in multiple streams.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah. And that matches, AddTrack also takes a list of streams.
Right.
Yep. It's a bit of an odd use case, but we grandfathered the oddness in from the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons to pivot from AddStream to AddTrack was to have an API where you didn't accidentally send the same tracks, the same bits twice. Which meant that for every AddTrack, if you enumerate all the tracks, you have to deal with the edge case of a track being in 2 streams at the same time. And the new API efficiently lets you enumerate by track, so you're not going to add it twice. You'll get an error if you try to add the same track twice, but then you need to specify that, oh, this is the video track that is in 2 streams, and I want that reflected to live in 2 streams remotely. Just the backstory there. So that's why it's plural.
Can we say that we have general assent to the working group to go forward in the direction that Jan Ivar has proposed?
I'm certainly in favor.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think so. Okay. So no objections. So
Great.
that in the meeting minutes. Okay. So now we're getting to the media capture screen share portion of the meeting. Hopefully we can get in almost half an hour on that. I'm going to turn it over to Suhas. Generally 12 open issues on screen capture, 8 for discussion today. So Suhas.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
This issue on the PowerPoint being special, where the application or window can go to the full screen. We did discuss this last time, and there was general agreement that we need to write a PR that kind of explains how this is very specific to the user agent, as long as user agent is able to determine the application or the window that went to the full screen is the one that was in the context when the full screen operation was carried out. So I have a PR created on that, and I see Martin has a few comments on it, so I'm addressing that one. So apart from that, there are no much updates on this particular issue.
Hi, Angelina here. Can you all hear me?
Some noise in the background.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Do you want me to try to change my audio device, or can I go ahead? Okay, so I just have a quick question. Is this only for PowerPoint, or are you saying that any application window that's already being captured that goes to full screen can invoke capture again?
For any application that takes up that
Okay, so you're saying if an application goes full screen, it gets captured?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. The PowerPoint was used as an example, but this applies to anything that would support going to full screen and you're doing a capture of that.
Verifying. Just go ahead, I guess. Thank you.
I think Bernard, that should be for this issue.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess if anyone else has comments, they can also put it in the issue. But
yeah, please do that. Thank you.
So
Yeah,
30
or in the pool.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Martin has made extensive comments on the pool.
Okay, 31, Jan Ibar.
Yeah, so this one was a slide we didn't get the last time. We need to define the behavior of existing constraints in screen sharing. Currently, it's underspecified. And I think we agree that, yes, we do need to support downscaling. And it's, in fact, critical because by default, most desktops these days are too rich resolution and frame rate for most people's uplinks. So the usage we're discussing in this slide is, with track get settings and track apply constraints. And the questions there is, what do we support? Do we implicitly say we support all constraints that are specified in different specs, or do we have an explicit list of the ones we want that browsers need to support? And the ones that come to mind that are relevant would be width, height, and frame rate. And the other question is, do we allow cropping of screen sharing, or do we prevent, or do we say that there's no cropping and that all, basically, in the spec language, that all settings dictionaries, all potential outcomes have the same aspect? And if we choose no cropping, then aspect ratio and resize mode constraints become redundant, although they might still have informative value, like you can read out what the current aspect ratio is from get settings. That's quite convenient. You could also read out whether it's currently being downscaled or not by looking at the resize mode. So my proposal would be that cropping, well, the problems with cropping is that I think it gets complicated and is a low value. In fact, we had a bug recently where screen sharing was cropping, and it's rarely what you want when you're seeing someone's desktop, especially if you're viewing a document or something like that. And it's also easy to miss that there's a problem, so I think we're better off. And I don't see use cases for it. So I would propose an explicit list and no cropping. Explicit list because I I think it'd be under-specifying. I think browsers need to implement this stuff, so the least we can do is put down what needs to be implemented specifically in each spec. And I think cropping is of low value and complicated and best avoided. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think we had general assent to this in the previous meeting, right?
I forget how far we got, yes. But,
I think we got pretty far, as I recall, but...
Okay.
I think I also agree. We need to do this as an explicit list and no cropping as well. And for all the constraints that we would want to support there, we need to specify in the spec, on the explicit list, what is the behavior. So that way it's very clear on the scope of it.
Yeah, I think we want an explicit list. The next step would be to, of course, come up with a PR with that explicit list.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So that seems like we want a PR with a proposal for the explicit list, and then we might iterate over that, but it's better to start off with a complete one.
Yep.
So would the list be these are mandatory to support, or these are the only ones that are allowed to be supported?
Be mandatory to support, I would think. I mean, we don't want to
That would
limit.
make sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone really wants to implement cropping, then I don't think there's.
I admit I get confused around this optionality around specs. I think anyone that wants to add a screen sharing constraint shouldn't just flip through pages of different specs and decide to implement it. They should probably try to get it into the screen sharing spec. Right?
Yes.
So yeah, it'll be a living document in that sense.
Okay.
So on the second question on the cropping, I think cropping makes some sense on cameras in that you can sort of crop a 4:3 camera down to 16:9, but it makes less sense for screen sharing.
Yeah, I don't see, like you said, Janivar, if you're cropping the screen share, it's probably something has gone wrong.
All right, cool.
Okay. 39.
And sorry, what am I on the hook for a PR there or no?
You are.
I am?
You are.
Oh, no.
You did not duck fast enough.
Right, that's what happens, Janivar.
All right.
So 39. I think did we talk with this one already? I think we had from last time. But anyway.
Yeah. Should I go over it again or? What was the outcome?
Result last time that I think probably we should skip it. But
I don't remember the outcome.
I do remember we spoke about this last time, and also I had a chat with Martin as well on this. He kind of tend to agree that whatever the feature policy in direction influences this, we should probably go with that. But his only concern is that we are kind of fate shared with how the feature policy is developed. It's still in the working, it's still in the development. But overall, he also thinks this might be something we need to align with feature policy way of defining things.
So to clarify the slide, then the question here is really whether to support this through feature policy or not support it at all in other than the top domain. So it sounds like people are voting or relying on feature policy there. So my only caution there would be in the screenshot there. It's browsers today, at least one that I know, we have a really hard time communicating well to the user who's really asking.
You're right.
And I guess feature policy will hopefully address that in some ways that maybe we can make better UIs. So we can say that it's not just the subframe that's asking for your camera, but at least the top frame agreed that this is
I think the last one I heard about that one was a suggestion that if you have to identify who's asking, just make it a top frame because he permitted the iframe to try to ask. So blame him.
Right. So hopefully feature policy will solve this. So in the screenshot you're seeing there, the trick is can you spot that the domain asking for your screen sharing is different from the page you're on? And it's quite subtle with JavaScript, with JS Fiddle, because they have a different domain that they use for their actual third-party code that anyone can add. So, all right. It sounds like we're leaning on feature policy here.
So does it mean that we need to make any changes in the spec, or is it more like we close the issue saying that we would have the development of this issue as part of feature policy spec?
I think we need to make a note in the spec that we have there is a feature called screen, and it's subject to feature policy.
Right.
Okay.
And yeah, you're required to implement and follow that, I guess, to the extent you implement feature policy at least.
So does it mean that we need to wait for feature policy to define screen before we talk about it in this spec?
Would it make sense? I'm not that good on this kind of spec language, but would it make sense to forbid this in other than the top level frame unless you implement feature policy? Or is that too strict?
Oh, I don't think it's too strict personally.
Okay.
Colin here, I think that anything else, I can't see how it would work if you didn't require basically that. So it just makes the whole thing redundant. So it seems like that's the right idea.
So delegation of the permission requires feature policy.
Otherwise, you don't get it. Okay. All right. Yeah. So basically, if you don't do the feature policy, you don't allow it. But okay. 43. I guess.
It's like Martin. Is Martin here?
I guess Martin's not here. Suhas, can you explain?
This is something which I'm not very clear. I did discuss at a very high level.
Well, I think we did go over this and agreed we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Last time. So we should clearly close this, right?
But there is a PR and there is use case that they think is something like this would be nice to have. So Martin was more on, from what I'm trying to kind of think in what Martin was trying to say. Probably I might get it wrong, but still, he thinks this definitely a security issue or privacy issue because you do not know what is being shared in terms of when the audio is done because it takes over your device speaker.
Right.
But his thing was if there is a way in the UX or somewhere where we can tell what the risk with this, then probably we might allow basically the thing that he was talking about, how tab level mute or something like that. So yeah, probably he might be a better person to say the resolution for this one. But at least he thinks he shouldn't. He did not say we must not do this though. So probably I can take an action item and I can reach out to him on this particular issue and see like has his opinion changed on this or he thinks this is what we should do.
Okay. All right. How about 49, Yanivar? I think we talked about this last time, right? And
yeah, I forget how far we got. Well, I do have a follow-up on this one. I think we did talk about it. So there are two slides on this issue. I added the second slide. The spec currently says no constraints on get display media, which means you have to only use video or get display to media video true, and then you get back the whole thing, full resolution, full frame rate, and then you apply constraints. And I think we talked about and the goal was to have prevent websites from influencing users' source selection because most browsers will pop up a choice selector here where the user can pick either to share their entire screen or a certain window. But we could have done that with pros instead that says basically UAs are restricted from using constraints to influence the end user choice of what to share. And that gives us the better API that encourages downscaling and avoids large tracks potentially having to deal with, at least avoids the JavaScript having to deal with doing a separate call to do the downscaling. So I think we had agreement on that. And unless I hear something, we can move to the second slide because there's a problem there. The problem is that because the US can't limit selection, and this is why we did this in the first place, why it was before this, is that you have a UX problem where you still use min and max constraints to say, the JavaScript can say, I must have something that's a minimum 640 wide.
Right.
And then the user picks up to share a 320 by 200 window, and then the user clicks yes, and then you get an over-constrained error, and that's really bad.
Right.
So the solution, I think, is to either ban or ignore the min-max and exact constraints in getDisplayMedia. Mm-hmm. And ban would mean there are two choices. We can ban and say, basically immediately reject with over-constrained error without a prompt. Mm-hmm. That seems the most clean way, maybe push back immediately and say you did it wrong, or you can ignore them, basically ignore min, and we don't have to ignore max, I guess, because we can always, provided we support downscaling, which we should for screen sharing.
Colin here. I'm strongly against the ignore. I think they should work the same way as other things. I can see ban, I could sort of live with that, but I mean, it's like, look, if people ask for divide by zero, they get an error. Like, that's how divide by zero works, right? Like, why do we have to ban them? Like, I agree they're useless. I totally agree with your argument. Like, no one would ever want this in this case.
So we're okay with ban?
Well, why? Why is ban better than error? All it does is change the error.
Sorry, I meant what I mean here, maybe I phrased it poorly. I meant that we should write the spec so that if you use a min constraint in getDisplayMedia, it shouldn't even prompt the user. It should immediately throw an over-constrained error to avoid the eventual error, to avoid applications trying to specify. Because remember, the original intent of the min and max constraints was to get an error back if the user didn't have exactly what you wanted, which leaks information, and it relied on selection. But by removing this, we need to remove this from, it doesn't really work on screen sharing well, first we shouldn't allow websites to query what kind of dimensions you might have on your system anyway.
Right. And
it should really be up to the user what to share, and then the website shouldn't try to mess with that choice in any way.
Yeah, okay. I'm okay with that, but I don't think it should be an over-constrained error if you use one of those things in ban, right? I mean, it's a programming error.
We could give type error, I guess.
Right. So just as a question, Jan Ivar, if you call get settings, you're not going to get the. Are you going to get the window size?
Well, if getDisplayMedia succeeds and the user decided to share their desktop, sure, you can use apply constraints as normal and get settings and find out. And if you didn't specify any constraints, you'll learn the actual dimensions of the user's window in that case, which you could also find by querying the video element.
Right.
So this is only to solve the bad UX case of that's described as a problem.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's a problem. I mean, badly written apps will, because if someone was applying that constraint afterwards, then he would get over-constrained anyway. So.
Yeah, but the difference is if apply constraints fails, you still have a track and you still have permission, and you don't have to negotiate permission with the user again.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I see that.
Okay. So I think we have a clear way forward, right? Over constrained error.
Right. Or did people like type error better?
We talked about type error instead.
Over constrained there sounds like more reasonable to me. Except that because you have specified too many constraints. Don't do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. 51.
This is about the browser tab sharing, where the user would want an option to select the current tab that is on, and there should be an UX to show the tab. This is something I had a chat with Martin as well. So there are basically two options. One which I originally thought was to have something like define a new display capture surface type called active window that hooks to the current window or the current tab that user is on. So it is basically saying this active window always maps to the tab that user is currently on. I think Martin's idea was probably this is more like a user experience design issue, and we don't need to say anything in the spec. The user experience should probably list all the tabs that the browser has, and the current tab, if you make sure that the current tab is placed at the top of that list, and that's all we need to do, because that way it fits into the overall thing about sharing the entire window and the warnings that comes with it, and we don't have to define any new security or privacy wordings around it. So it fits into the existing model that we have, and I kind of tend to agree with the proposal from Martin, and we might probably all we need to do is that at the least we need to do is to say I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I will probably ask the team here that do we need to say anything if we pick the option 2 in the first place, if it's a purely UX option.
So I was thinking back to where my last Hangouts experience with tab sharing, where I shared the active window, and then I could flip that between different tabs while I was looking up other stuff in other browser windows, which didn't get shared. How would I'm not sure that would work with the current spec. So there might be something here, but I'm not sure what it is.
So one question, so when Chrome does tab enumeration, doesn't it only enumerate the tabs of the current process of Chrome you're running in? So if you have multiple Chrome instances open with multiple tabs, you don't see them? Is that what you saw when you were messing around with it?
I think this is if you have a current window in context, say the current browser that you're on, and if you do share, the proposal with option 2 is that you have all the tabs in that current process. Yes, the current open window that's there, that's in focus. All the tabs for that window will be listed, and the one tab that you're currently on will be on the top of that list.
It sounds like this can be handled by the picker then.
Yes, I think it can be handled by the picker.
Right. So if we think that might be the right approach, then we don't need any changes in the spec as such.
So we have consensus to move forward on option 2. Sounds like we do.
I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
See if we can get one more in. Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, I realize that probably we should skip this one. I mean, it's from the ping review, and Martin only made one quick comment, and I need to ask a follow-up questions rather than...
Okay, let's do issue 55 then.
This is probably an historical thing that Harold and Martin both responded on that issue, so I'm just trying to paraphrase what's being there. So we have get display media on Navigator. So the issue was, why can't we put it on the media devices like what we have for get user media? So I think with what I spoke with Martin, he thinks, yeah, it should be possible. But I know, Bernard, you had a comment on that, saying that it's already implemented.
It had originally been Navigator media devices. Then we changed it to Navigator get display media, and Edge just shipped it.
So coming new into this on screen share, so I do not have the context for to say what's the right approach. So I would let the team make a decision on this one.
So having get display media being right off of Navigator does not open us up to additional options to other display types in the future. Right now we support screen, but what about in the future if we have connected head displays, like 3D head-up displays? So maybe this is a good idea to have it right off Navigator because it can be its own category for future display devices.
Did the call end?
Can you all hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch what you said.
So what I was saying, having it off of Navigator, having get display media in Navigator makes sense in the sense that it has its own category. It's not really an output device like audio and microphone. It's an output device. And so what I was saying, in the future, we could use this Navigator.getDisplayMedia as a way for other type of display devices, your screen, but in the future, like heads-up displays, like 3D, things like that. So I was just making the argument of having Navigator.
Yeah, so get display media could be its own category, I guess, going forward.
Well, I think for some backstory here, the reason get user media moved from Navigator to media devices was highly practical in that we needed an object to fire at. So I think the question, the pragmatic question would be, do we ever anticipate display media ever needing to fire any events? And if we do, we want to make sure it lives on, because we can't fire events on Navigator. So, and I think if we're fine with saying that we'll never have a need to fire any events, then I think we can live on Navigator. Or we'll have to come up with specific objects that these events would be. As far as what I think the issue that got raised, the reasoning, the question from I think Fippo in the issue was, like it was on Navigator because we also have the legacy Navigator get user media, and that might create an impression that they should use get. Why is there a new method there and an old deprecated method there? It might cause confusion and lead people to call the wrong method. I don't know if that's a strong argument for moving it if it's already shipped in Edge. So, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much, I guess.
It doesn't seem to be something that's worthy of worry. Either way, if we flip the coin, I would be okay with either outcome. But telling Edge that they have to change what they shipped seems painful to me.
Well, it would create a nice symmetry with get user media.
Yes.
That was a joke. I'm sorry.
Symmetry and 50 cents will buy you a cup of coffee, isn't it?
I think we would all like a new API that doesn't live in two places. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for today.
Bernard, just to confirm,
Yeah.
What did we decide on the issue 55?
I think decided to let it stay where it is.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
On Navigator.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for coming, folks.
Okay.
See you next time.
See you next time. Blue Heron thanks you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.